Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10 and a half hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving, and let's improve postpartum care together. Today is Kaela Kajiyama. She is a pediatric sleep coach who I love to connect and collaborate with. She's actually the sleep coach who provides information in Thriving After Birth, my online self-paced postpartum course. She helped me see things differently when it came to this fairly new specialty. Because in years past, as I became more and more aware of sleep coaches, I got the impression that this was all about implementing cry it out, but paying someone else to do it for you. And then I started to see more nuance, but I was still quite skeptical, especially as it related to supporting breastfeeding goals. But Kaela has really helped me to see the bigger picture. And of course, all sleep coaches are different, and they come with their own ideas of what's right or wrong or what works and doesn't work. And there's not a ton of hard science yet, but I can get behind sound advice when it's framed the right way. It's not a far cry, actually, from things I would call midwifery intuition, things that we midwives have known for all of time, but have had to prove before being heard. Anyway, I digress. On with the show. Oh, and a gentle reminder that nothing we discuss on this show should ever be considered medical advice. Please speak to your local provider about anything that comes up in this show that resonates with you and your needs and your health care. My guest today is Kaela Kajiyama. She is a pediatric sleep coach, and in full disclosure, she is my favorite pediatric sleep coach. She is the person that I refer to exclusively, and that's not to say that there aren't other great sleep coaches out there, but Kaela is someone who I find to be so flexible and open-minded that it works for me in a way that I didn't always think was possible. So for instance, if you guys go back and listen to episode 3 of season 1, Kim Weiss-Lewitt, IBCLC, and I talk a little bit about the way we work together with clients. And of course, it's not the same with Kaela and I because our timeframes don't entirely overlap. But even with that, there's a way in which we are able to work with the same client, and she knows kind of instantly how we have worked together and the kinds of support that they have already had. And she's able to support my breastfeeding moms in ways that I don't think every sleep coach could. Anyway, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of feedback about judging other sleep coaches. But the long and short of it is that I'm simply trying to say that I really respect Kaela, and I'm so grateful that she is here with me today.
Oh, thank you for having me. Your words are so kind.
Well, you know, we've now had a good long run of getting to know each other, and it's been really wonderful. And I've really enjoyed watching you grow and watching your content and getting feedback specifically from my clients about the things that they are working on with you and the ways that you work with them. So that's been really, really powerful for me. And you've helped me dispel a number of myths, and I'm sure we'll talk about that today. But before we get too deep in, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Kaela. I am pediatric sleep specialist. I also have been a newborn care specialist and working in homes with postpartum families for now over the last 13 years or so. And that experience led me to focus in more on sleep in the last maybe a little less than a decade. I've always worked with sleep, but realizing the huge impact it made. Similar to what you mentioned, though, previously, as I had a very different take on it. I thought sleep help meant that we were putting 3-week-old babies in the crib and not feeding them and letting them cry. And I soon learned that wasn't how it needed to be at all. And in fact, when families were sleeping effectively and quality over quantity and working with what they had, they were thriving a lot more. It was like that missing piece of support that people didn't realize they had. So I worked in homes. I do 12-hour overnight shifts. I get to work with so many interesting and awesome families over the years. And when COVID happened, I took my business mostly virtual and realized that actually now the impact I could have on different populations and more people was so much greater and very, very, very effective still, if not more effective, because families were doing the hands-on work. And I was reaching families that might not be able to afford someone in their home, 12 hours, 7 nights a week, because that's just a whole, as you and I both know, like a whole other world for many families. And so in the last 2+ years now, moving almost exclusively virtually, I still do go into some homes in person. It's just been really cool to see families start to thrive and everything connect. And I love that you talked about your clients and when I get to work with them, because I do know the support they've already had. And it's really cool because it's unprecedented from other families I work with, unfortunately, where it's just they go their 6-week appointment and they're done, versus you, where they just have such a deeper understanding of their own needs, even, and knowing they need some help. And I could go on for days about that, but it's been really cool to see.
Well, it's also with anyone that I refer to, it's a slow roll. Like I never just introduce the idea and expect them to go to you the next day. Let's say in the early weeks, long before I think they're ready to talk to you, I've already kind of got them keeping their eye on you, making sure that they are following you on Instagram or, getting your newsletters or getting your freebies or whatever it is that they can, so that they can figure out whether it feels like a fit to them. And one of the things I love that you do that really helps, I think, segue my clients over into your world is that you offer this opportunity for Q&As via Instagram. And I know that many of your questions come from my clients because they see this as this great tool to say, well, let me see what she thinks about this when I'm saying you're still not ready for her, right? And then that way they feel like they know you a little bit when they get to you. So that's been a really cool tool for transitioning. But one of the things you just said that I don't know that I even planned to talk to you about today, but it's funny that I said it in my intro about Kim, and then we just kind of circled right back to it. I'm fascinated by the fact that even you have been able to take your business successfully online and be virtual and truly believe that there's an impact. And that's been one of the most profound things for me, is that COVID taught me so much about being more hands-off as a practitioner, as a provider. There's so many things that if I am in the same room with you, I step up and do for you, and I sabotage you, and I don't mean to. And now if I were to go back to in-person care, I think I would not do that anymore. Of course, it would be really weird if I suddenly, went right back to what I'm saying I learned about this. But there's something so empowering about giving someone the tools and letting them do it themselves, because let's face it, if you come into their home for a period of time, it is merely that, a period of time. It doesn't necessarily leave them equipped, right?
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting because I had always offered this, virtually over the years, but when COVID first hit, I had a repeat client and she was like, oh, no. Like, what do you mean you can't travel right now? I was like, I can't travel. Like, there's no way to travel. We can do this virtually. Here's how it works. And after 5 evenings of what we were just modifying her child's sleep, just like we did with her older one, she goes, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm saying this. And it's nothing you did wrong. But she goes, I actually didn't realize how much work went into this and consistency. And I feel like I've learned more now than I did last time, even having you in our home for 4 weeks, 70 something hours a week. Not that it was a bad thing, but she goes, I'm having to do it myself. Like before, I kind of had the notion of, okay, I pay someone, they're here. And then I just don't really fully understand, even though you're talking, I know that really in the end, I have someone here. And she goes, now that like, this is it. I can't have a nanny in right now. I can't have anyone in the house. I have to do it. And she goes, it made me like step up and actually do it for myself, which learns faster, like you're saying. And we don't mean to sabotage anyone, but when you're in the room, literally, even when you think I'm holding space and giving time for learning, it's in the end, when they're actually going to do it, and most families will say this, it's like, oh, wow, that clicked because I did it hands-on and it's a trial period and I learn what works for me in that. And that's really cool to see.
Yeah, I mean, it is a thing that when you are working with someone in person, there's an aspect of being, quote, on the clock, right? Like they're paying you for a shift. You have goals to accomplish. At some point, you just kind of make sure that you're getting your goals met. It's the same thing for me, especially on a hospital shift, right? Like I might be trying to help somebody breastfeed shortly after having their baby, but like maybe somebody's laboring next door and I'm kind of in a rush to get over there. So some of it is, and I know, audience members are probably like almost getting tired of hearing me use this phrase, it's a systemic problem. But all of these virtual solutions, I think, can become part of a system that better supports people and more comprehensively supports people, right? So I think that's part of the reason I've really gotten attached to you. The other thing you said in your introduction that really spoke to me and that I don't think I knew before was hearing you talk about, that broader postpartum work you did and then zoning in on sleep. It reminds me of my own journey a little bit too, and that I've been a midwife for a really long time. And then all of a sudden, I became super focused on two things, exercise and then postpartum. And the exercise thing came first. It was actually that led me to realize, like, every time I tried to work out with someone, let's say, we ended up sitting on the floor and breastfeeding or crying or doing whatever needed to get done. And I was like, whoa, this whole postpartum world that I never really engaged in because I thought I was doing my job by seeing someone in the hospital days 0 to 2 or 4, depending on whether they had a vaginal birth or a C-section, and then seeing them again 6 weeks. And if they called me with a question in between, of course, I answered their question. But there was this whole world that opened up to me when I was finally interacting with postpartum people on the regular, And so I find it interesting how careers evolve, especially careers in healthcare.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned the systemic part of it. Of course, I won't go on a long rant, but sometimes I'll get people who will send me, for years, I've ran a very successful business, not being on social media. Like I just wasn't on it. And then I got on it, and I'll get people who will randomly send me a message saying like, it's biologically babies don't sleep, and families setting them up for, unsuccess or whatever terms they use, not even a term, and they need to know that like, it's normal for this and that. And, being tired is part of parenthood, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's cool. However, we unfortunately, majority of people do not live in a world where they have in-home help all the time. Most families I work with and talk to, and I'm sure the same for you, are dual working families these days. Like things are not, unfortunately, we don't live in a system here, especially where we have a year off of work to be home and adapt. So while of course, I'm not talking about forcing children and babies to do things that their body just can't do, it's not the reality that people talk about for most people. So what I mean by that is like children actually finding a rhythm for most families with their infants and their sleep is a survival thing. It's not about, oh, I just, like beauty sleep. It's actually a survival thing because mom needs to go to her 12-hour work shift. Other parent needs to go to their 12-hour work shift. They have to survive and thrive. And so we don't, and that's what I tell people when they approach that. I mean, usually I don't even respond to stuff like that, but sometimes, it's a deeper systemic issue for sure, because we're not given. I mean, most families I work with are going back to work at 6 to 8 weeks. Like it sucks. It's sad. It's not ideal. But that's where sleep plays such a huge part, is that it is crucial for these parents to get up and work and to actually feel okay, which then stems into their mental health, so it's this whole cycle. And it just keeps going. So sure, it sounds great for babies just not to sleep and moms to have her village come over, parents have their village come over and do everything during the day. But tell me where it's really like that in a lot of places right now where we live.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say. You just kind of hit on it right at the end, but mental health, right? Like when we have too simplistic of a view of infant sleep, we are not taking into account the full range of mental health problems that people face. And I don't just mean the birthing person. We know that partners can get postpartum depression. Everything from that easier stage or earlier stage of baby blues all the way to the more extreme. And how many people are white knuckling it until the right moment happens and they finally say, uncle, I need some help now. And I had a run of time where a bunch of my clients who had already, I often use the phrase that they graduate from my program. And I'm trying to not use that phrase anymore, but it's hard to figure out what to say about people who are kind of done with that phase in terms of their work with me specifically. But there was this time when I was on Mommy Labor Nurse, on her podcast, because she was also one of my clients. And she ended up talking to me in that episode on her show about what happened in her mental health journey shortly after we finished working together. And that episode, many of my graduate clients had heard, and all of a sudden my phone was blowing up with text messages from a certain number of people that they were recognizing that they themselves were in trouble and that they needed to hear that story and that conversation to recognize it. They heard a certain very real descriptions of some symptoms that they themselves had been having and they weren't facing. And we all know the importance of sleep and for ourselves. And sometimes that means we need to help our infants sleep so that we can sleep, so that we can have better mental health, so that we can have happy, healthy families, get to work, be successful at work, not lose our jobs, pay our bills, like on and on and on and on. So we can't have tunnel vision on these issues, right?
Yeah. And, even, I mean, I know it's kind of all over the place, but even stemming on breastfeeding, you'll have people who say, oh, you don't want baby to sleep for this or that because of impact breastfeeding and this and that. Well, I'll tell you one thing. Many, many families I talk to and work with, and because I do a lot of sleep conditioning, which is birth to like 12 weeks or so. Many, many families contact me around like 6 weeks, and they are just exhausted because they're ready to throw in the towel on breastfeeding. And I'll tell you why, because they go, the only way my baby's going back to sleep is by breastfeeding. So all night long I'm doing this, and all day long I'm doing this. I can't catch a break. And what we end up doing is we talk about, okay, well, I refer to an IBCLC if there's an issue, if there's something that screens, I always screen. However, what's so funny is 9 times out of 10, they implement these little changes of, okay, do you think they're actually hungry? Well, no, I just don't know what else to do. I'm like, well, that's not breath, we approach that. And then I have these 2 different IBCLCs that I refer to primarily contacting me going, what are you doing? Because, and the first time I was like, I didn't tell anyone to stop breastfeeding. They go, no, my next meeting with them is that like, they're doing great actually, because they're learning that they can actually sleep. And when they sleep better, their mental health is better. And when they feel better, they're like, oh, it's not breastfeeding isn't the issue here. Actually, it was just that my baby needed to be just laid down for a second and not, latched on again. And actually, like, I enjoy it actually now, or I might not love it, but, I am doing it. And so it impacts so many things. And so I see it quite the opposite with breastfeeding, where people will say, oh, sleep and they don't breastfeed anymore. I'm like, no, most of my people are then feeling less touched out and less, overwhelmed by feeling like they're the only item, or they almost feel objectified, where they feel like, I mean, this is their words, not even mine, where they feel like the only way I can get this baby to sleep ever is to be on my breast and on my chest. And when that ends and they go, oh wait, no, like I fed them and now I can do this, they come back to, oh, I can keep breastfeeding. Like if this is how it is, like I'm good, like I'm not touched out. And it's cool to see the mental shift in that. And it's just, like I said, it all connects.
Yeah. And, it's so funny to hear you say that, because I have a client right now who just got over this particular hump. I'll tell a little story that I think many, many listeners can probably relate to. This combination of, is it breastfeeding that's driving me crazy? Is it the lack of sleep that's driving me crazy? Is it the feeling like a pacifier that's driving me crazy? All the questions that go through a mom's head. Well, I had this client recently who has this big giant baby who just wants to nurse all the time, right? So we finally broke down, when is your baby sucking for the purposes of nutrition? And when is your baby sucking because that's just what babies do want to do? And it's okay to be the mom that is completely okay with that, if you're really okay with that. It's when you're not really okay with it and you're losing your mind that we need to make a tweak. So I had her really analyze her feeds that she thought were lasting 45 minutes. And we got her down to a good 20, maybe 25, and, got her to figure out how to get that baby off the breast so that she didn't feel like a pacifier, so that she had more time. That's enough time to take a shower, for God's sakes. And we're talking about in every feed, 8 to 12 times a day. Right? So she suddenly gained all of this private time back. And is it perfect? No. Did the baby have a growth spurt again 2 weeks later? Yes. And we're working through it, right? But that's where I hear the overlap in the work that I do, the work that lactation consultants do, and the work that you do. We're all part of the same team. And as long as we play on the same team, we can make people a whole lot happier and more comfortable through this really trying experience of parenthood, right?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And that's literally what we do is, okay, is this suckling or this actually, they go, oh yeah, you're right. Wait, I can pull them off. I can stop. I don't have to. I'm like, yeah, here, and I have someone else you can talk to that specializes in that department just to confirm that with them, so you feel okay. But yeah, it's something, it's literally is so more often than not, it's simple as that. But there's so many things in parents' heads, which I'm sure you know. I mean, online, everything with a grain of salt. Like, I mean, my info, everyone's info with a grain of salt because something might not align with you, and that's okay. But I think it's just so important to support the whole picture of, like you said, feeding and just everything else that comes along with it.
Well, and I think also people are really trying to, and rightly so, manage their finances and all of that. So people try to do certain things. They try to learn certain things online for free through Instagram accounts and things like this. But when you're learning in sound bites, you're not getting the full picture, right? And I know I'm out there putting sound bites out there too. We all are. That's the nature of Instagram. But you've really got to pick your battles and figure out where you need support. Okay, changing gears a little bit. One thing I did really want to talk to you about today is the stigma around infant sleep, and kind of if you could take us through the pendulum swing, whether that means sort of, well, this is what people thought a while ago and this is where we're at now, or even if that means this is where we're at now and this is how divided we are as a people on the issue.
Yeah, I'll kind of go through. I mean, we could talk for hours on that. But here's the thing: at the basis, infant sleep changes constantly, and the reason it gets people and people get very overwhelmed is you have this early newborn stage where babies. I mean, whether you have your baby or in the hospital or home, most families, you have your baby and they're passed out for 5 hours. Like you get them to nurse and then or eat, and then they're out, like they're sleeping. So you have these newborns that are very, very sleepy, around the clock, sleepy, sleepy, sleepy. Some are not, some are a little more, there's different things going on. But what happens is you go out of this newborn phase of the first like tiny few weeks or so and into, oh, wait, now people think their baby is fussy or their baby is, not sleeping. And I go, well, no, actually, there's just a transition now. They're not supposed to sleep as much. Now they are awake a little more. And so that's where it can get people. So you go from this newborn stage of lots of sleep into infancy, where there's quite a bit of sleep still needed. But it's also, like I said before, we don't live majority in a society that we are home all day and have help. So it is what's happening is not that sleep has necessarily changed biologically, but we also have lifestyles that do not allow us to be home in our village constantly, where our baby can then sleep throughout the day. So because of this is where you see babies that are, overtired, which is a whole other term we could unpack in a sec too. You see babies that aren't sleeping, newborns that are awake for 5 hours and then won't fall asleep. I go, well, that's why they really cannot be awake for that long. Or you reach the point in like middle to late infancy where sleep changes again, and there's growth spurts and there's developmental things like crawling, trying to talk, sitting up, standing up, pulling up, moving, rolling. I mean, everything that evolves. And so as a whole, sleep goes from a lot to a little less, but still quite a bit that sometimes I think people underestimate. And where we're at as a whole on that topic, I mentioned the amount of sleep needed because it's so important to just understand that at a biological level. What people don't realize often is, regardless of where you are on this pendulum that we'll talk about in a second, there is a biological need bearing, for certain medical concerns or certain very rare situations that on average babies need this decent amount of sleep. So there are some where they will say, we just feed on demand and sleep on demand. And that sounds cool if it works for someone, if it works for families. But I will tell you that these families that are doing this and are in these Facebook mom groups or parent groups with, different parenting styles and things, the big issue, I'm sorry, I'll go back to your question. There's two camps, and I'll go back to this after. There's basically now the camp of feed your baby on demand. Usually they're the same camp, I will say. Feed your baby on demand and sleep on demand. And your baby can just sleep on you all day and they'll sleep as they need to. And eventually they'll outgrow this and they'll sleep someday. Like, you're supposed to be sleep deprived. This is what it is. Then there's the camp of people that, I mean, there's two extremes always. And there's a very extreme where people are like, no, at 6 weeks, like this baby is getting on a schedule. I'm feeding them every 3 to 4 hours. Like, there is absolutely zero wiggle room, like, for anything. And then on each end, there's also in that middle slash more towards the, schedule, there's people that are like, no, I feed my baby when they need to eat, and that's fine. And also I need a routine and a schedule because that's how I work and that's how I operate and that's what I would like. And then there's some kind of downward a little that are in between of that. And the problem here is that when you make an extreme of anything in life, which I think the last 2 years have like taught people that, I hope, in any aspect, it you're gonna, when you make such an extreme for yourself and you set this extreme expectation on either end, you end up where it's usually not working. Like it is usually not working. And I've worked with people who are, I don't know if the term is like influencers, but people that are very well known in certain groups of things that come to me behind closed doors and are like, this isn't working, but I don't know how to undo it because it's so far gone. And what I mean by that is, the idea we could talk about again forever. Attachment parenting and attachment theory are two different things. And we, in the last like 12 or 13 years, have become, it's getting a little better. It was pretty bad with certain pediatricians and their recommendations that were not practical for, they were well known, with their books and things. They were not practical for the standard home life, people that work and people that need to go do things. So you can have an attachment with your baby, and you can have a baby that is on a schedule and sleeps around the clock and goes to sleep for all their naps and sleeps 12 hours at night and eats on a schedule. It does not mean that you don't have a healthy attachment with a secure, healthy attachment with your baby. Like that is proven. That is not the issue. But what's happened is in all these parenting groups and opinions and all these things have gotten lost to telling people, if you don't do this and hold and wear your baby 24/7 and respond to them with your breasts at every single peep they make, you won't have a secure attachment. And actually it's literally not accurate. Like, it's not an opinion, it's not accurate. So there is a difference between a child in Romania in an orphanage who is left in a crib for 17, 19 hours a day with no human interaction, and a child who, okay, it's time to sleep now. You've been fed, you've been burped, everything is fine. You're fussy on me right now, so it's okay to be fussy in your crib for a little bit. Like, that's not abandonment. That is not breaking an attachment. It is totally two different things. Like, it's just not comparable. But the problem is people have pulled these extreme examples into people's homes and are now like, how dare you take a shower while your baby is in their fussy time, because you've now broken their attachment forever and they're never going to attach to you. I have families coming to me saying their babies are angry with them. I go, what do you mean your baby's angry with you? Because initially that's a huge mental health screening. And they go, no, well, they were crying yesterday they were just really fussy and I needed to shower. I felt really gross. So I put them in their bouncer seat. They were safe. And I went and showered for 5 minutes and I came back out and they were a little calmer. But then when later on they were fussy again. So now I know I just broke that attachment. And I'm like, who's telling you this? Because it does such a disservice.
Yeah.
And so those are our pendulums. Sorry.
No. I was fascinated listening to you go on, because you have these very deep conversations about sleep, right? And I do too, but when they get really deep, I'm like, Kaela, I need you. So you're deeper in the sleep rabbit hole than I am by a landslide. But I love that you brought up the attachment parenting versus attachment theory thing, because this kind of reminds me of something I've said a number of times, which is that medical knowledge, and I'll group this into medical knowledge, for lack of a better word at the moment. I guess anything psychological even falls into this category. New information takes something like 17 years to trickle down, right? And I have a almost 22-year-old. And so when I had my only child, Dr. Sears and attachment parenting was all the rage, right? And so I did all the things, right? Like, I wore my baby, I breastfed exclusively, and I slept with my baby, and I did all the things because I was going to be attached to my baby. And it has taken many, many, many years to recognize that these two things are not the same thing, and really learning about what it means to talk about attachment theory. And I will, in the show notes, find a great reference so that people can see what the difference is between attachment parenting as what's the word I'm looking for? Gimmick is not what I mean to say. What were you going to say?
I don't want to say fad either, because I don't want to use the word fad. I do have great articles though I can send you though to attach. For a while, like you said, those years, and my oldest is 14, and that was like, that everywhere was all those books, like the 7 of them. What was there? It was like the breastfeeding book and the sleeping book. Like, it's like principles where people are like, oh my gosh, like I have to go to work to feed my family. Like, I'm not going to have an attachment with my baby.
Well,
How dare me?
I believe that Dr. Sears and the crew believed this, right? I don't mean to say that they were putting something out there that they were like, wink, wink, we know this isn't true, but we're putting it out there anyway. I do not.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
I'm struggling to find the words, but I do think that it made things hard for people, and it gave people an almost impossible standard to live up to. And there are things about it I love, and I think this is why it lives on. So there are things I say to clients that I think could be interpreted as I am heavily promoting the idea of attachment parenting. For example, 9 months in, 9 months out, in my attempt to normalize that babies are going to want to spend a lot of time on your body. I want people to know that that's okay and normalize it. People worry about spoiling babies and all of these things, but that doesn't mean that I am negating your mental health or your desire to sleep. So it's a question of pivoting from one big idea to the small minutia of daily life and saying, where are we at in your happiness? What is your bar for success? How can we move that bar around with some reasonable strategies so you can achieve the right ratio of what your idea of success is and happiness, right? So I think that's what we're both out there doing with people on an individual basis. You know, another thing that you talked about that I think really aligns well with the way I work with clients, I really try to get families to only think in 2-week increments early on. I don't know if you said something at one point about like 2 to 3 weeks. And I was like, that's why I do this. Like, can we please get tunnel vision on 2 weeks? Because you're going to have a whole different baby. Like, we might as well just swap it out with a different one.
Yes. And I also like to tell people that, you know, like you said, like, right. I think, with the 2 weeks, it's like nothing is actually wrong. And really quick, because I don't want to lose that. I don't want to forget. But when you just mentioned, you know, like, for 9 months plus, your baby is going to likely want to be on you. That's normal. And if you look, I do a free sleep Q&A on Tuesdays on Instagram. And if you've ever like browse on that, on any given Tuesday on the answers, people will say like, my baby wants to be held. And when I put them down, they wake up, and it's like my goal in life to normalize the fact that like, they want that's not actually a bad, like, they want to just be, it makes sense. Like, you're warm, you're their parent. They want to be on you. Like, that is comfortable. It's not bad if you want to try something else, but you can't, but it's very normal. Like, I like to normalize that. I'm like, well, yeah, of course. Like, think about it. They're on you. They're cuddled into your chest. Like, that makes perfect sense. And people go, oh yeah, you're right. Like, okay, you're right. Now, how can I change that if it's not working for me? And then we discuss.
Well, not to mention, they can smell you, and they're really good at that. We have to remember that we are animals, right? Like,
yes,
they smell you. And so one of the things that I work on with people, and I'm not sure where this fits into the work you do, but I'm assuming you're going to tell me it does. You know, how do we get the baby to go from maybe mom to dad or partner to partner? That transition is really difficult for people often, especially when they're breastfeeding. And that's an opportunity for a break. And that's an opportunity for somebody else to work on getting them to sleep, et cetera, et cetera. So how does that work for you?
Yeah, I like that you asked that. And the first thing I tell people, which might seem a little doomsday, but it's not, is while we also normalize, you know, holding them and the fact that when they're on you, they're happy. And I always normalize with people like, when you change it up and now they're going to be on your, the other parent or another caregiver, even just if we're talking about holding, like, baby only wants to be on mom for all their naps. So now I'd like, you know, if my partner could have the baby, or if my mom or someone could have the baby for a few naps and hold them. I normalize the fact that there will be an adjustment period. Like, they might fuss for 30 minutes while they're being held by that new person. And that's not the end of the world. They're cared for, someone's holding them, but we need to normalize adjustments a bit more. I feel like we need to normalize that it is not always going to be this picture perfect, magical, calm thing. Like, babies do fuss and babies do give resistance. And it might not be the best answer for some people, but the reason I say that is because, like, you get to make a decision as a parent. So if you say to me, you know, and I'm talking like a 2-week-old baby, like, I'm holding him or whatever, or I'm holding this baby, and then I want to give the baby to my partner, and I go to do that and they cry, and you know, they're upset instantly, but I fed them and everything. And I say, well, are they being cared for and held? And yeah, they are, but they're fussing for a little bit. And I say, okay, go take a shower. And you trust that person? Yes, of course I do. Okay, they can handle it, because you have to be okay with some discomfort. Because if you continuously, not that again, if you're not comfortable and you want to bring the baby back to you, that's fine. But just know there's always an adjustment period and it passes. So instead of throwing in the towel immediately, like, oh no, I tried that, they fussed right away. Like, give it a little time. Give it a little time. It's the same thing when we go from co-sleeping. If we want to move to a crib, there's going to be an adjustment period. It's not going to be, if anyone tells you that it is magically going to be this magical, just 100% like, oh yeah, look, now they slept 12 hours in their crib after sleeping with me and nursing 9 times at night. They're lying to you. Like I'll argue that to the end of time. Like there's an adjustment period. So the way I support that is, like you said, like offer it to a partner, someone else to hold, and know that like at the core of it, yeah, there might be a little discomfort, but if you trust that person and you're okay, it will pass. You'll find what works, and what they do that works for the baby might not be exactly what you do that works for the baby. And that's something else. That's a whole other talk, but it's something else important. Like your partner may hold baby a different way that's totally safe still, and finds that's how they calm the baby, and the baby gets really comfortable and snuggled into them, and you may do it a different way, and learning, and if you trust that person and it's okay, and when you can release that a little and honor that that's how they do it, then you're able to relinquish some of that burden or stress on you to someone else too.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to also recognize that the pain, so to speak, that we feel as the birthing person, the mother, when we hear our baby cry is really real. And I get that. And that is a barrier for people. That is one of the reasons they don't have the baby spending quite enough time with a partner or another person. And I get that that's very real. I'm not discounting, but that takes a little bit of talking through, sometimes with a professional, sometimes with your partner. And then on the other side of it, there's the pain that the partner feels when they feel like they're not good enough. And all of these things are made better by just using your voice and using your words and talking it through. Because once we recognize that this is a universal experience, we don't feel so much like we're the one that's doing something wrong, right? So that's some of the work.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why also when I talk with families, I ask about 1,000 questions, because it's never so simple as just a one word answer, because it's okay, well, how's your partner feeling? They'll report, or what are you feeling? And and it's usually a talk through, like you said, it's usually a talk through of breaking it down to the simplest terms. Okay, you hear them cry for a few minutes and they're being held. So what's your concern? Like we go through, obviously I don't say it that rudely, but what's going through your head? What's happening when this? And we go down this little ladder. And in the end, if it's not broken down, of course, I will refer to someone always to help, because sometimes there are more significant things going on. But often it's that, oh yeah, okay, you're right. Like I trust that person. And right now, me being the only one that can hold this baby has actually reached a point of more frustration and pain than me letting that person work on building that. Because I do tell families very honestly, like if you never give them a chance, that baby is only used to you. That is what's going on. It's not your fault, and it's not anything you're doing wrong. But if you're wanting baby to go to grandma because you're about to go back to work, but you have not yet let baby go with grandma at all, you can't fault grandma for that. You have to work on tiny increments. So we do a lot. Like it's so much more than sleep. I mean, I talk to families that we work on a plan 6 weeks out from going back to work of like, okay, this is this baby step. Because sometimes people just need that permission. Permission's huge too. I'm sure you see it a lot. And just know like, okay, I can do this today and I can do this tomorrow. And I just talked to a mom recently, and she told me she has a toddler who's like 2 and a brand new baby. And she said, I feel like I am and they contact me because the toddler was not sleeping suddenly in the middle of the night, and the toddler sleeps with dad and the baby is with mom in another room right now. And that's what works for them. And she said to me, she goes, I feel like everyone's sleep is my responsibility, and it is very overwhelming and really getting hard. And she's not alone, because it's that newborn phase, that mix of all, like you said, the pain of hearing a cry, and then this mom hears the toddler upset in the night or awake, and it's such a burden on the birthing person typically, that you 9 times out of 10 will hear that if you ask someone, do you feel like everyone's sleep is your responsibility right now? Like even if you just have a newborn and a partner, and they'll probably tell you yes. And that's really sad and really stressful. And it's really helpful and important to unpack that, because that alone releases a lot of societal pressure of various ideas or things you read, and lets you kind of tune into what works for my family right now, like what actually works. And I'm not responsible for everyone's sleep. It's okay. Like that's what I tell parents a lot too, is you're not actually responsible if your child naps or doesn't. You hold the space for it, you give the environment, you think you have the right time. if they don't take a nap, it's okay. Like, you had that space for them. Like, you're not in control. And that, I mean, now having a parent of a teenager, and you obviously have a 20 something year old, like, their happiness is not entirely my responsibility. It's like it, and so that goes deeper than that. But sleep, you give the space, you give the ideal. Yes, you are responsible as the parent to offer your children and really work to make sure they're getting enough sleep. But at the end of the day, if your 2-year-old doesn't nap today, like, you did what you could. You're not the end all.
Well, in the early days and in the early years, even, I think breastfeeding and sleep are two things that become symbolic of how hard we're willing to work and how much we're willing to sacrifice for our children. And that's where we start to edge on this kind of like martyrdom thing, right?
Yes.
And it's,
Yes, you nailed it.
yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I don't mean people are crazy. I mean, the experience of it is crazy.
Mhm.
We've all been there. And it's about managing those thoughts and finding your way back to neutral, right? Again, I love to talk about pendulum swinging because it helps me frame this discussion moving away from extremes. So to give people an analogy who might be listening, who are still pregnant and can only think about seeing their baby's toes for the first time, it's birth plans. I don't love the phrase birth plan. I like when we refer to this as birth preferences, right? Because if we put some flexibility in the system and create some wiggle room, we're going to find success more often. When we define success very narrowly or at just the edges of spectrums or the ends of those pendulum swings, we are much more likely to be let down because everything else from, where the pendulum swung the farthest all the way to the other side is something that our brain is now considering not success, right?
Yes, yes. The birth is a good example. Oh my gosh. I have stories working with families in their homes right after birth. Like, that is so, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Okay, I have 2 questions for you that came out of some of the things you were saying while you were speaking, and then I want to change gears a little bit and try to leave our listeners with a couple tips for different age ranges. One, this question actually is just my own question as a CrossFitter who spends a lot of time in very noisy gyms with new parents coming in with their babies. And I have a bias. I just am curious whether you're with me or not. Any thoughts from the sleep coach perspective on babies sleeping around noise? Any like do's or don'ts or thoughts about it?
Oh, I think it's great. I think that the whole reason, and people I think you and I have had this little like joking conversation before around sound machines and things. And people think it's to not have sound. And my purpose in using sound machines is to help create not a dead silent environment, because people will feel, parents, and there's so much more around that. But yes, I think now, granted, there's I think noise is fine. I think also though, being realistic about expectations, because babies are also humans, and I don't know many adults that I speak with that can go sleep in the middle of a CrossFit gym and take their 2-hour nap with bright lights. I'm just giving an example.
But I bring it up because I have seen so many babies
Mhm.
sleep just fine while
Absolutely.
big weights are dropping on the ground. And at first it was just a fascination, but then it led me to think, wait a minute, are we making it harder for babies to be flexible about where and when they sleep if they always sleep in silence or with a very particular static white noise? I guess that's more where I was coming from.
Yes, it's great. And some babies can and will sleep in their crib, in their room, with some sort of brown, pink, or maybe white noise on, just for some sort of something, so their house isn't just completely quiet. And that's why I have families use it. Or I have families use it because they might have a baby who in general is a little more of a sensitive temperament, where the way they do get them to sleep is by doing that, because when they are out and about, they do not sleep. When they hear a pan drop, they just don't ever get used to it. And then I have babies I work with and I will say too, sleep habits have heavily amount to do with your baby's ability to go and sleep, like you just mentioned, with weight dropping and things, because they know that's time for sleep and they have that ability to sleep. And that often plays more into the sound part than sound alone as the issue. Many families I work with will say it has to be that, it has to be completely silent. And then still they only sleep for 15 minutes. And once we work on their habits, they go, oh, we were just on a train and they slept for 2 hours and it was not quiet. Or we were at a movie theater and they slept the whole time. Or we were at amusement park. And I go, yeah, that's where its habits play in. So as a sleep person, I am huge on what works for your baby. I mean, if your lifestyle is the fact that like you're going to get in that bob or whatever jogging stroller and you're going to go to your CrossFit gym and they're going to be in that stroller, they will learn to just sleep during that time, or they'll be awake and fine because that's just what they're used to. So every baby is different though. And I don't like parents to feel shame or frustration when their child seems to sleep best when they are in a crib. And I don't think they're creating that because they weren't sleeping well either when they were around noise. So it's so child dependent. But there's nothing wrong with baby sleeping in if they will sleep, like go do it. Like, but I don't like when families come to me and they tell me, my sister says that like I've created this issue, where they'll only sleep this, but mom's like, I work from home, so I can put them in a crib every day. So yeah, they might not sleep when we're out at the amusement park or I don't know, somewhere random with noise because they're not used to that. And so it's so much on your lifestyle. But I do think sometimes there is too much of a push for flexibility on both ends. And sometimes there's too much of a push for rigidity. So if your baby will sleep in the CrossFit gym, I think that's awesome. And that's for most people ideal because they can catch a nap while they're working out or doing their things. But there's not an exact ideal situation because everyone is so different. So I do believe sometimes we can create situations where, and that's why I work with families on flexibility early on. We can create situations where we are so rigid that yes, if your baby is only sleeping in their crib for 4 naps a day and you go out and you're like, they won't sleep, it's usually a matter of them getting used to it. So going out more, they'll start to sleep. If your baby only sleeps in their crib and one day you go to work out in the gym and they don't sleep in their stroller, it's probably likely because they're like, well, what's going on? Like, I never fall asleep in my stroller. Like, I'm always home. But it's like that nurture in nature, right? Because I have families that are very on the go and their children still just don't do it. They just don't sleep on the go. They do not sleep well on the go. So they have to work with that. So it's not, I don't want people to ever feel shame around like my baby won't sleep while I'm out here or they will. But there's flexibility around it. So it's not.
The crux of the conversation that we're having, I think, is flexibility first and then layer in your child's temperament, which of course it takes a little hindsight to understand temperament. Yeah. And that's why we don't value highly enough temperament / personality in babies, because they're developing it, but we don't know it yet. They can't tell us in words. They can't show us their personality, but we can look back when we have years of experience and say, oh, this is a thread that's been constant through my child's life, right? You threw in a couple things that I think you should define for our listeners and for me. What in the world is the difference between brown, pink, and white noise?
Oh yeah, so they're different frequencies. You can go play like a sample online. I actually prefer brown or pink noise with families if they're going to put some sort of noise on because it's a little more realistic into our daily lives. It sometimes will sound like a car or like a jet engine a little more. And it's a little more, I just feel like those sounds are found in nature a bit more. And again, we use it basically because it helps trigger sleep. It's like another like thing of like, okay, there's this. Also, many families I work with have other kids running around. They have jobs. They have people in and out of the house. They have I'm in Hawaii and most people are in very tiny multi-generational homes. So for their baby to nap while they are home working from their computer, yes, they put on some sort of sound because it blocks out other things. And that's good. It works for them. That's what they need. But I wanted to add real quick that working with what your baby does also is helpful. So I have good friends, and they're also clients. We went to the beach yesterday for like 8 hours. This baby is very fussy in the car. Like, despite anything they've done, she does not like the car. It's a nightmare. It's like an hour on this one beach we go to. Well, she's now sleeping more predictably, and they've worked on naps. So I go, well, get her a nap at home before you head out because she doesn't usually sleep out. So while she didn't sleep on this long car ride, she was content because she was napped. So families I work with often are going to the gym or going somewhere. I'm like, well, get that nap in at home, schedule your trainer for 10 a.m. and see the difference. And they go, oh yeah, they didn't nap in the stroller, but they were actually like fine because they were happy because they had just slept. So it's working with what you can also, but not writing off your baby as a temperament, but instead look at other factors first, because sometimes people will always say, my baby is so fussy. They don't like this. They don't like that. And I go, well, let's look at this. Try making this change. They make that change. They're like, oh yeah, that worked. They're not actually this. And so I like what you said about they're developing. You don't know their temperament necessarily, but you can sometimes work with it.
Even in your description of temperament, you're explaining the concept of flexibility. Yeah. You're teaching a parent how to maybe shift a schedule that actually can be shifted. Not everything can be, but some things can be. But we get into this negative space sometimes where we're like, oh, I'm stuck. There's nothing I can do. And you need an outsider to help you see what's possible, right? Okay, another thing you brought up early on in this discussion that I would love it if you could provide some tips on, should they exist, they must. We talked a little bit about parents underestimating or overestimating how much babies are awake or asleep. And I'm wondering if you can give us all some tips to do better at that, because that is a place in my conversations with parents where I feel a little stuck sometimes, because I'll be in this place where I'm like, what they're saying can't possibly be true, but I never want to think somebody doesn't know themselves or their own situation. So I'm not ever going to approach it that way. But we all know that this is a reality, that it can be a hard thing to estimate timing of things that are in random intervals. So how do you help people get a better handle on what's really happening versus what they think they see happening?
Yeah. So the first thing I do is I work with families on making a rhythm for themselves. I'm not talking about schedule at all. I am just talking about, with your 3-week-old baby, have a rhythm for yourself. You feed them, you change their diaper, you might feed them the other side if you're breastfeeding, or they might finish their bottle, because I teach about, bottle feeding in a different way too. You change their diaper, you kind of feel out how they are. And for newborns, I go by about an hour of being awake. And we talked about this. I'm not like the end all stand on awake windows, because I think that creates issues too. But we'll talk about that in a second. But basically, when you have a rhythm, you will start to know what your child is doing better than when you don't have a rhythm for yourself. You'll be like, okay, I fed over here and changed over here, and oh wait, now they've been awake for 4 hours because they just won't sleep. And I go, they're usually, babies are craving a rhythm. So when you create a rhythm for yourself, you know what to expect next, and it allows your baby, you'll start to notice your baby's signs. Bottom line, if someone calls me and we just talk for free, they don't hire me or anything, and I just say, hey, get them into a rhythm, let me know in 2 weeks how it's doing. And they go, oh my gosh, it's huge. Because for example, in the newborn stage, the first 4 weeks or so, your baby likely isn't going to be awake more than an hour at a time. And that is just biologically what it is. So if you notice your baby is staying awake for 4+ hours, I believe you. I see it often. Like I don't discredit that, but they will seem not tired because they are so overtired. And that is our body's biology. The cortisol increases. They're on this like almost just intensified energy burst, but they're just so tired they can't fall back asleep. So that's why I encourage families at this point of going very back to basics. Feed them, change their diaper, or burp them, change their diaper. Okay, they woke up at 9 and it's almost 10. Why don't you, swaddle or wrap them up or whatever you're going to do, and maybe go into if you're home, a calmer area, and see if they might just kind of fall asleep. 9 times out of 10, they pat their bottom. It sounds so simple when you've been struggling with a baby awake for 4 hours. And so people often will be like, are you kidding me, lady? Like, what do you mean? Like, what? That? But then you go do it and it's like, oh, okay, I was ahead of it a little. So that's the newborn stage. Like an hour or so is usually what they can handle, being awake at any time. And that's just what it is. So finding a rhythm of just literally simple. I am not talking about getting out 500 flashcards of black and white contrast, and less is more with babies. And that is something that's really important too. So find a rhythm, and less is more. I promise it is more. I work with developing infants all the time. Like, yes, these things are great, but babies in the end need a blanket on the floor and your face, and like it's okay. Like there's enough there. So find a rhythm for you early on. It doesn't mean a schedule. It just means they woke up, I feed them. There's nothing wrong with feeding them again before going to bed, which I could talk about again for hours. I feel like that's like with anything. But finding a rhythm early on allows you to then see what they're doing. When you have this rhythm of I feed them, I change them, I might twaddle them, they might go to sleep. And then you start to notice, oh, around 6 weeks or so, which is common, they're not sleeping again. They're like, yeah, like they're not tired. Like they're not even napping on me. Oh, because they actually need to be awake a little longer and they're going through a growth spurt. So they probably need to eat again also. So you'll find that rhythm. And when families do that at the core, just from early on, they'll start to notice patterns in their own baby, which will then show them, oh, these are their tired signs. Tired signs and tired like cues don't just magically appear out of thin air. Sure, there's a textbook of them: rubbing their eyes, yawning, disengaging, turning away. Sometimes the eyes around the corners will be red a little bit. They might get really fussy, but that's usually when they're very tired. But when you have a rhythm with your baby, you'll start to notice their own things. And you might have a baby that doesn't show you anything, but oh gosh, if I get past this hour and a half mark, like I know what they do. So you work on putting them to sleep sooner. But you can't get a textbook or even my advice and be like, oh wow, instantly that worked instantly. It is not an instant thing. So finding a rhythm of feeding and changing and just being awake for a little bit, you will start to notice what your baby is actually showing you. But it's not an easy fix. Sorry.
That's okay. You just reminded me of something that is totally different, but related. And I think it'll help drive home the point that you just made. When my daughter was little, and I mean from very young age, like, let's say 1 until she was in older middle school or high school, she was a really well-behaved kid in general. Like I really never had any of the standard things. Like I never saw terrible twos. Like I don't know what they are, things like that. But anytime that she wasn't on her quote unquote best behavior, I would realize the next day that she was getting sick. So I always beat myself up as a parent because I was like, why can't I figure this out, that when she misbehaves, she's about to get sick? But you know what? We just can only figure out so much and be so far ahead. But that's kind of the essence of what you're saying is when you get in touch on that level, you start to go, I know what's coming if I don't do X, Y, and Z. With that said, what I also think I'm hearing you say, and I don't want you to think you can't tell me I'm wrong on my own podcast, you can. I think what I have heard you say is that it's actually my thinking that needed some correcting. So rather than me hearing my client say, my baby hasn't slept for 7 hours, and me going, I just don't think that's true inside, I need to recognize that that probably did happen, is happening, but they need the strategies to figure out how to stop that from happening. It gets hard though, because you hear things like, that's not possible. Like we take that thought so far in our rigidness that I have been taught that that's not possible.
Yeah, I hear you. And like, there's no fault to you, but yeah, that is, we literally, because logically it's like, there's no way that's possible. I have been in homes where I have literally just observed, because I'll do that the first day. I have seen babies not sleep. I am on like baby monitors and Zooms that I have seen babies just not sleep. And that's where I go, okay, we're going back to basics. Like this is what needs to happen. And when it's the middle of the night and parents will say, that's usually the daytime-ish kind of middle of the night. And when I have families that come to me and say, they haven't slept at all, I go, okay, keep a log. And we'll look and they're like, oh no, they were just up every 2 hours, but they did sleep. So there are two things. But typically I just talked to someone the other day where they're like, they were awake from 2 p.m. to like 10 p.m. And that's 8 hours. It's very not good. Like it's not ideal for anyone. It's not a pleasant experience. No. And and so it's strategies of, hey, go back to basics. Like you have to just be on a routine. And that is why I also drive home rhythms for families, because I also, on that same pendulum, and this will kind of go into the sleep tips of getting them to sleep, is there are families where they're like, I just don't notice anything. And that's where I go, okay, we're gonna look at the clock then for their age right now. So that like, 0 to 4 weeks, we're gonna look at about an hour. When you hit that like 50-minute mark, why don't you get them swaddled up and get ready for sleep? And they go, okay, that works so much better for me, because certain personalities prefer a clock. But if it's not working after a few days, okay, maybe we need to make it a little sooner, maybe a little later. For, your babies that are like 3 to 4 months old, sometimes that's like an hour and a half or so. So it is helpful to also look at clocks if you're home and able to do that, because some families are like, I feel like I'm not in tune with my child. I don't notice their pattern. I don't want anyone to feel bad for that, because sometimes we're just not as aware, and that's okay too. But noticing what isn't working and what is working allows you to just take these two on a scratch piece of paper and go, okay, they're not falling asleep for their nap, and then they're up for 4 hours, and then I finally get them to sleep. Where can I change this? Okay, I'm going to try to go them down for their nap a little sooner. I'm going to try to feed them again beforehand and see where that goes for a few days. So it's like, yeah, but it is like you said, though, even as someone working with babies, because I've had pediatricians my kid's pediatrician, she'll go, yeah, someone just told me the other day their baby didn't sleep for 6 hours in the middle of the day, and I know they're just like losing it. And I was like, no, their baby probably didn't sleep for 6 hours. And she looked at me and she goes, you think so? I said, yeah, definitely. I think so. I think that actually is a thing, and it's helping them through that part.
Well, that's really important for me to hear. So I'm really glad that you shared that with me, because that is a thought that I need to combat. Now, I don't think I ever say to my clients, like, I don't think that's true, but that's the thought.
I don't think you do either.
Right. But nonetheless, that's the thought that's going on in my head, and it probably influences to some degree my answer. So my subtext, so to speak.
Yes.
Anyway.
We hope you're enjoying the Mother Wit podcast. If you are, please rate us and leave a review in iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to your podcast. Thanks so much. Now, back to the show.
Kaela is the sleep coach in Thriving After Birth. So Thriving After Birth is my online course. It's me, it's multiple lactation consultants, pelvic floor, physical therapy, mental health, and sleep, right? We cover everything in that course, and Kaela's the sleep coach. So some of this is in that course. But I wanted to make sure that for our listeners who might just hear this episode, that we leave you with a few solid tips for each age range. So if you could share with our listeners what you believe to be sort of the most important things that a parent should know for each of those, the way you break down time frames. So I kind of in my notes had written it down like 0 to 3, 3 to 6, and 6+, but maybe you don't think that way, but that general idea.
Yeah, I think pretty similar. Sometimes it changes with new discoveries, but I usually look at 0 to 12 to 16 weeks. That's like that newborn phase. And I really recommend during that time of working on establishing feedings with your child, the basics. Feedings are number one, whether that's breast, whether that's formula for you, whether that's a mix of things, whatever that looks like, establishing feedings for them is a huge sleep tip because they cannot go longer stretches of sleep or do anything like that when they are not being fed and growing well. Also during that phase, I encourage creating rhythms for yourself. So no matter what time of day it is, you know that, okay, usually I feed them like we just talked about, and I burp them and I change them and I might swaddle them and we lay down, just finding a groove for you, whatever that looks like. It's a lot of discovering for you and your baby what is working. Now, a sleep tip during that time to actually help you get sleep is determining what a full feeding is, getting these full feedings in, and that routine that we just talked about, the rhythm, will allow you to get these little chunks of sleep in. And I encourage during this time also, if you notice that my baby is sleeping 4-hour stretches or 3-hour stretches and I'm not sleeping, then I really encourage you seeking out professional, usually mental health help, because those are signs of other perinatal mood concerns going on. And that is a bigger issue. So often families come to me during that 0 to 16 weeks and say, I'm not sleeping, but the baby, when I get the screen, I'm like, well, they're sleeping biologically what I would expect during this time. So I really encourage during these months that if you feel really not well and not like yourself and you're not sleeping when they're sleeping, it's actually seeking help, because the sooner you reach out and seek help, the better that'll be. And that is like the top sleep tip I have, is that and the feedings. And the next stage, I really encourage, so usually about 4 to 6 months, lots of floor time for your baby. So the early stage as well, but between 4 and 6 months, there's lots of developmental changes. You'll hear about the 4-month sleep regression. I don't treat it as that. It's treated as like a progression forward, because your baby's changing now. Your baby's wanting to move, they're wanting to roll, they're using their limbs more. So lots of floor time to let them do that during the day allows them to sleep better and to recognize your baby's changing. So now they may wake a little more because what used to work for them isn't working anymore. So I encourage you to get lots of floor time in. Still continue those 3-hour feedings, at least if you're not feeding on demand. And with sleep, I encourage you to give them more time to settle. That is like the top tip there. And what I mean by that is know that it isn't necessarily your job to get them all the way to sleep and lay them down. If they're been fed and they've been cared for and everything is good, and you're like, they're not falling asleep on me, it's okay to put them down in the bed, put them down somewhere safe, and give them some time to actually see what they do, because you may be surprised at your 4 to 6 month old and what they actually can do versus you trying to do it. And this is the age too where many babies will start to resist sleep in parents' arms, and it isn't because they don't like you, it's because they like movement before sleep. It's comfortable, it's how they settle. So I encourage between 4 and 6 months, continue those 3-hour feedings. I really can't say that enough. Some books will say to go to 4 hours of separating feedings during the day. I really encourage not doing that. Unless it works for you, then great. But during the 4 to 6 months, lots of floor time, recognize their changes and work to try something different, and know that what you did as a newborn may not work now, and that's okay. So give them that time to settle. 6 to 9 months or so, there's more developmental changes. So lots of floor time, lots of still around the clock, feeding on demand or feeding every 3 hours, because they start to get a little more distracted at 6 to 9 months when your baby starts to scoot around or sit up more or start to pull up. With some babies are doing at 6, 7 months, they might eat a little less. So you might notice at night they might be waking a little more or nursing more during the night. And what's happening there is that during the day, it's often simple. It's not just simple math, but it's during the day, they're popping off of you because they see the dog run past, or a sibling, or, oh my gosh, we're at a park and there's a tree and like the grass is cool to touch. They're eating less. So pay mindful attention to that and know, oh, yeah, they're waking more to nurse during the night now because, oh wait, I think they nursed like 3 times yesterday because they were so active and excited. So pay attention to their food during that time, and lots of floor time again, because so much around sleep is developmental milestones. And so if your baby is, again, I'm a huge thing on holding babies. However, if your baby in the night is then wanting to crawl over you and not sleep and pull up and push down if they're in your bed or whether they're in the crib, chances are they need more of that during the day. So lots of movement during the day, and getting into a routine around 6 to 9 months of, you can have a little more set time with your naps too. So you can have a little more of the set time of, okay, they nap at 9 and 1, and I notice that works well. And that gives you some flexibility, or there's flexibility in the rigidness where it's like, I know this is what they do, and kind of rolling with that. After 9 months, 9 to 12 months, is another like ding, 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 developmental milestones, because babies are now trying to use their voice a little more. They're pulling up more. Some babies are actually walking at this point. And again, like nurturing that during the day helps so much with sleep at night. And especially now knowing that like your baby will still need these 2 naps a day, and they might have phases where they don't nap. They might, around 10, 11 months, sometimes you have babies that just like don't want to nap. It will pass. Continue with it, because all the families come to me, they go, oh, they haven't napped in 3 months, it's 11 months old. I go, oh gosh, no, that's what's happening here. So stick with it. And then after 12 months, we have that 12 to 18 month range, which again is more developmental things. But really looking at your toddler at that point and how they have changed in their language, your own individual baby, and how what worked in infancy may not work the same now when they hit this 12-month mark. And so if previously your baby was sleeping all night and now they're 12 to 18 months, and you notice when they wake in the night, they don't necessarily put themselves back to sleep like they were. I want you to know like that actually going to them right when they wake instead of giving them more time can be really helpful with 12 to 18 month olds, because there's that validation. There's more awareness around you. There's lots more separation anxiety. Go to your baby, hold them at 2 a.m., lay them back down. They see that, they'll usually get back into the routine of sleeping. And again, it's that daytime. And above all else, from about 4 months on, you can have set times to when you start your day, which can be the single most important thing for sleep. And I don't mean that if you know it's Saturday morning and you can sleep in for work that you need to wake your baby up at 7 a.m. Like, do what you need to do. But from 4 months on or so, I really like to see families waking their babies up in a range for the day, because it sets that rhythm, and you'll find sleep will flow a lot more versus if you have your baby waking at 10 a.m. one day because you nursed them again at 7 and they went back to sleep, and then 7 a.m. the next day. So from 4 months on through toddlerhood, you'll have that kind of set time, and it'll work with their clock and yours of when they wake for the day. And that'll set a routine that isn't a schedule, but it's just this setting this tone for sleep as they grow.
It's funny that you say that, because my instinct would have been, and I think it is this way for many people, wondering if you can explain why, it feels like bedtime routine should be more important than waking. Can you explain why that's not necessarily the case?
And bedtime is important, but the reason I say for waking for the day is that actually helps to set the tone more than bedtime, because you can't outdo. So if you struggle at bedtime, let's say you decide that bedtime's going to be 7, there's just up and down, and then your baby wakes up at like 5 a.m., you feed them again, they go back to sleep till 8 a.m. They're now not really awake enough during the day to actually have a decent bedtime that's the same. So when we keep the wake time the same, around the same time, like I usually, a lot of families, it's like whether it's 6 or 6:30, 7 to 7:30, around that window or so, it sets the tone for the day. It sets the rhythm for the day. So you are easier to get to bedtime, versus if you have bedtime the same, but then the wake up for the morning is all over the place, that actually ends up affecting the rest of the day and bedtime. So you'll have people where they'll say, gosh, they're not going to bed till 10 p.m., but then they're letting them sleep till 10 a.m. And so I will say, well, you need to start waking them earlier in the day, and then their bedtime will also shift. So it's easier to shift the wake up for the day than it is the bedtime.
Nice.
And that's just to set you're just resetting their clock. You can't really reset a clock at bedtime. So even adults that irregularly sleep, if you, adult and child sleep is different, but at the core, if you're going to bed at midnight every night and letting your body sleep until 11 a.m., you're not going to go to bed any earlier the next night. So waking up at 10 a.m. might allow you to sleep at 11 a.m. So that's at the basis of it, is why I focus on waking for the day around the same time, and then seeing how the day kind of unfolds.
That was super helpful. Awesome.
Okay. I'm glad. I try to keep it simple.
Oh, that was profound for me. And once you said it, I'm like, oh yeah, it makes perfect sense, but I couldn't quite come up with that one on my own. Okay. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today. Can you tell people how they can find you?
Sure. You can find me. I am pretty present on Instagram. We do Sleep Q&A Tuesdays, and I try to stay active and engaged for families that are scrolling their phones for some hopefully quality sleep support. And that is sustainable.sleep on Instagram. And then My website is www.sustainablesleep.co, and you can send a message on there as well anytime if you want to, chat through what's going on with your child, or sign up for our newsletter and get our weekly sleep tips or blogs. Always hoping to, talk sleep and help to support that conversation around what that looks like for you as an individual and your family.
And then I heard a rumor that you're starting a podcast.
I am soon, but that's to be determined on the name. But yes, it should be in the next month or so, because I really enjoy talking. And I had a client the other day who's like, what, or the other month, and she's like, why don't you make a podcast? Like, I would listen to this while I walk. I think that would be good. I'm like, yeah, I think so too. So we can bring on professionals like you. We can talk about, what the pregnancy and wellness part looks of it. And because sleep is not just the one thing. It's not just sleep. If it was that simple, everyone would be sleeping. So yes,
Totally.
that's to come hopefully by May.
Well, that means that your episode will have likely aired before you start your podcast. So I will make sure that our listeners know how to find you if your podcast is already up and running before this airs. Thank you so much. I really enjoy when I get an hour of your time. I always love talking with you.
Likewise, I love hearing your perspective. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
You too.
Hey everyone, it's me, Tanya, your host here at the Mother Wit Podcast. You know I sometimes invite my clients on the show to talk about their birth stories and postpartum experiences, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what those clients and I actually do together. I started Mother Wit to help people in the perinatal period achieve their health and wellness goals. That means whether you're hoping to conceive and struggling with high blood pressure or high blood sugar, or you're having trouble managing anxiety or depression in the postpartum period, or maybe you just need support and advocacy between prenatal or postpartum visits, I can help. Get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwitmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. I'm looking forward to working with you and maybe having you on the show too.